Perspective, Canada's new outlook on foreign affairs and defence. To borrow a well-worn phrase in Ottawa these days, Canada stepped up this week. The government laid out its plans for foreign policy and defence.
Canada can work for better, Mr. Speaker. We must work for better.
Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland acknowledged the long-accepted world order is shifting.
The fact that our friend and ally has come to question the very worth of its mantle of global leadership puts into sharper focus the need for the rest of us to set our own clear and sovereign course.
The course Freeland outlined diverges sharply from the Trump administration on issues such as climate change, free trade, multilateral partnerships, and immigration, for example.
It is wrong to view the woes of our middle class as the result of fiendish behavior by foreigners.
Freeland's vision dismisses what she called the narrow pursuit of national self-interest. Instead, it builds on the democratic values recognized by the institutions of the past century: the rule of law, territorial integrity, human rights.
Our own open society is most secure in a world of open societies, and it is under threat in a world where open societies are under threat.
Today, we set a new course.
As if to emphasize that foreign policy and defense go hand in hand, the defense minister announced plans to reverse the decline in military spending, beefing up the Canadian forces in numbers and in funding that would amount to a 70% increase in annual funding in 10 years.
The result is a new vision for the Canadian Armed Forces. It's about the forces' contribution to a Canada that is strong at home, secure in North America, and engaged in the world.
We're going to look at the government's plans from several perspectives this week with experts here at home and in the U.S. But we're going to begin with a look at how Canada is viewed from afar with one of Canada's most experienced foreign correspondents. Matthew Fisher is international affairs columnist for Postmedia. He spent more than 3 decades living and working around the globe. He was most recently in Ukraine. I'm curious to know how you think what she describes now as a clear and sovereign approach will affect the way Canada is viewed in the parts of the world that you visit, most recently, for example, Ukraine.
Well, she is very highly regarded in Ukraine, it must be said, very highly regarded. I think Canadians always kid themselves if they think that anything we say or do really matters anywhere overseas. I've spent decades listening to Canadian self-congratulation about how important we are. Sometimes it's because of our humanitarian aid, peacekeeping, all our noble deeds. Frankly, there are certain elites in certain countries that admire Canada for this. But the people on the street, they have almost no image of Canada whatsoever. And I frankly do not think anything she has done now will make a difference. But she was speaking not only to a Canadian audience, of course, she was speaking to an international audience of elites. She comes herself, in a way, from an elite. She didn't start out being a member of the elite. She grew up in northwestern Alberta in the Peace River country. But in the last 20 years, she has become, in her own right, a global player with major executives from big corporations and with government. So she was speaking to those people, and of course she was speaking, it must be said, to the United States. So when you ask the question, what do Europeans or others think, I would say nothing. If you ask what the elites in those countries think, there will be positive messages. They will be glad that she seems to be joining this coalition that is forming with Merkel and Macron against Trump, a coalition of ideas that oppose him. And it's very interesting, Merkel and Macron have been much, much tougher on Trump than our own Prime Minister. Our own Prime Minister has been milquetoast.
She was pretty polite, offering generous thanks.
And thanks for the history. But there were, it is clear that she believes, I feel very strongly that she is around the cabinet table, certainly when it comes to foreign affairs, she's the only adult there. The others are uninformed. And I think what she did was helpful to Canada with other elites.
You wrote a piece recently suggesting that she was uniquely suited to the role. What are you driving at?
She grew up in a home that was very anti-Soviet and anti-Russian, anti-Kremlin. And that formed her world thinking. Then she went out into the world very young. She was already an activist for Ukrainian independence. Chrystia Freeland was, when she was 21 years old, when she was a Harvard student. And she got right in there where the gas canisters, the tear gas was being thrown by people in the streets. I've seen photographs of her back when she's 21 years old with masks on, scarves on, to avoid this kind of thing. She went from there. What formed her, that was her first idea, and Russia remains a huge problem today. But what that taught her is that the world is a dirty, mean place, and you can't always be nice. And our history in foreign policy, and we hear it in spades from this Prime Minister, is how nice Canada is. And I don't think that helps Canada particularly. I don't think we should be unnice, but we have to be a lot tougher. And she's tough as nails because she understands that Russians lie constantly. And she won't accept this behavior. She'll speak up against it. That helps us with the Chinese, I think, and a lot of their behavior, and it will help us in the Middle East. She understands why. When I listened to that defense speech that followed her foreign affairs speech, I saw Chrystia Freeland in quite a bit of that speech.
Do you think that what was offered in the defense policy that was offered after her speech offers enough muscle to be a little tougher, as you suggest Canada needs to be?
No, the words were tougher. The money is great, but it's so backloaded. If you look at what's actually coming in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, and there are great challenges overseas in the next 2, 3, 4 years, there isn't much there. It is a remarkable document that the Liberals would produce something like this, because as one of my colleagues wrote, John Ivison, in the National Post, it was a very conservative document, if you like. Whether she will get support from those who traditionally support the Liberal Party, whether she will get support, but I see Chrystia Freeland's ideas in this more than anyone else's. You know, they had the budget in February and they cut $8 billion from the spending in the military budget. And nobody's really remarked on this, but 10 or 12 weeks later, we're planning to increase spending by at least $62 billion. Well, from cutting 8 to going up to 62 in 10 weeks, there has been some kind of reckoning. Well, Chrystia Freeland became the Foreign Affairs Minister in January, and since then I think we've had a far more adults policy on foreign affairs. So the tone is very good. In terms of getting 600 more Special Forces commandos, great, but it'll take some time for them to get there and the money for them. We need those ships badly. Maybe now there will be the money for them, but these are all maybes because so many white papers haven't delivered by all parties, not just the Liberals. The Conservatives are full of it too. They make these grand promises and then it comes up against budget realities. 2 or 4 years from now, there's a deficit crisis or unemployment bounces somehow, goes up by 3.2%. And then the priorities shift, and the military in this country, since the end of the Second World War, has always been where parliamentarians, where governments have gone to get money.
I appreciate your insight into this. We'll have you back to follow up on the follow-through, shall we say.
Well, and I'm not optimistic, I'm cynical, but I think there is a chance. At least we're starting, for the first time in a long time, to move in the right direction, because Harper would often speak like this, but he didn't do a whole lot. Maybe finally with Chrystia Freeland as my inspiration, or the inspiration for these ideas, maybe that will work.
Thanks again.
Thank you.